Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of On the Hook, Yellow Pike Media's official podcast. I am Rick. I am your host. I am also the director of influencer and community activations here at Yellow Pike. And I'm very excited for this episode because we get to talk to our very good friend, Dan Mitre. Dan, how are you? It's been a little while since we've chatted.
I'm doing great. Yeah, it has been a while. A lot has happened since you and I have seen each other in person, but I've been following along on your adventures with Lego building, and I'm always impressed.
We're jumping right into telling secrets. Okay. No big secret. Anybody who follows me on social knows. So we're here today. We're going to talk about building communities around games and brands. And this is something you and I both maybe know a little bit about. Why don't you tell us, a little bit of your backstory, who you are, what you're doing now, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah. I've been in community within video games for quite some time. I started many years ago as actually a video game tester and put myself through audio engineer school and just fell in love with the video game industry and learning how development cycles are applied to the publishing side of things. And when we get to start building communities in games. And so I had an aptitude in building community. I think just on a personal level, the charisma helps, connecting with people helps, it's finding your sense of empathy, but also providing a sense of leadership also helps cultivate great communities. And I've been doing so within the community profession for about 2 decades now. And I've had great opportunities across big publishers and developers like Sega and THQ and EA, and now recently here at Ubisoft, where I'm a director of community and work with a great team of community developers, community managers, community representatives, as well as a whole host of other teams that bring great communications to our players and insight into the halls of publishing and development to make better games and services. So I live and breathe and eat community, much like yourself, Rick.
Yeah, I've spent a huge chunk of my career in community, and now in the influencer space as well. And there's a lot of similarities there too, because you're building a community of influencers, and some of the best influencers come from within a well-established, well-built community. Especially if you're talking, direct to brand kind of activations. I think we should probably start at the beginning though, right? So you and I know what community is, but kind of give me a breakdown of what does community encompass within the brand sphere? It's a little bit different at every developer, I realize, but just broadly, the 15-second pitch of this is a community and why it matters.
I mean, I think the elevator pitch on communities applies to any industry, any cause, any product. It's a group of people that have a certain interest towards a certain idea, or in our case, an entertainment property, a video game. They like to collect around that thought and socialize with either each other, with new people, or with those that directly impact their experience. So developers and those who talk about the games. So a community is a living and breathing organism full of people that want to share their mind and want to take their experience a bit more personal, beyond just that one-way street exchange of playing a game.
Yeah, I think communities take that transactional element of I'm buying an entertainment product and make it I'm engaged with an entertainment product and those who make it, and hopefully my voice gets heard and we together improve the product, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the best place to start? At what point, say we have a new IP, right? We just got the green light. What's the best place and when is the best time to start building that community?
Well, I think it starts as soon as possible in terms of like building the internal tools, setting the right expectation with your cross-functional partners in, say, marketing or brand and our development teams. And here at Ubisoft, and as well, I want to say this applies to really every professional team that's running communities or eventually will. We typically get past our first playable, and we say, okay, this game is alive. Like you said, it's been greenlit. There is a certain amount of resources dedicated to the long-term development of this game. And then we start bringing on the teams that are going to talk about it to the world and to the players. And so we start getting involved early on by saying, hey, okay, is this a brand new IP, or is this a sequel to a long-standing franchise or another entry in that franchise? And that's going to help us understand the type of audience that we look to cultivate, the types of audiences that will be coming in and building our community with us. And we start laying down the plans there. So a lot of it starts internally before we even tell anybody about the game that we're working on, or saying, hey, like, come out and check out what we've got, what we're working on. So starts internally within the halls. And that's why you need some good professionals who ideally have experience or have a passion in connecting with people, engaging and building a relationship with them.
Absolutely. Could not possibly agree more. It really is, people think communities just spring up around a thing, which is true to an extent. But there's also so much behind the scenes planning, organization, assembling, getting buy-in, from stakeholders within the game of what the community should be, and how we should grow that community, that I don't think a lot of people really kind of get looking in from the outside. There is an awful lot of collaboration within the studio long before the first social post goes out, long before any community tools are utilized to start bringing players in. From your standpoint, where do you start that process, that outreach to community? Do you look for the organic first, or do you try to build some sort of official channel to bring people in and hope organics grow from that? What's your approach?
We typically start building communities when there's something to share, when there's something to talk about. I think the worst thing to do is have an official presence when there's nothing for you to really provide or incentivize, provide a value to the relationship that you're building with a player. And that doesn't necessarily need to be like, oh, this new title update. Oh, you've got this new announcement. It's saying, hey, this relationship we're building with you is important to the long-term success of not only this product, but valuing you as a player. So we typically start getting involved when we do have, something to mobilize people to talk about. And that may be around, say, an announcement. Okay, cool. So in our case, hey, we've got AC Mirage. We announced that, right? Now, fortunately, we had channels that were already established. But during that week, we had a larger presence in channels. And we were really doubling down and saying, okay, we want your feedback, because we're collecting this feedback. We're improving the game while it's still malleable. So that was our CTA, or call to action. It was providing value in that relationship. So typically we open up channels when we have something to say. And it's those channels that people are getting information about and starting to talk and converse. And now a community is born, whether you like it or not. Once you get that announcement and that's out there in the world, a community is born. So internally, are you ready for that? Do you have the right tools to learn, hey, are they talking positively about your game, negatively? And what are you doing about it?
What do you do about those kind of things? Say for example, let's use Mirage since you brought it up. So you had the announce, you put the info out there, and now with every game, not just Mirage, there's going to be that lull period, right, where you don't have the next thing to talk about or the next thing to show. And as you and I know only too well, the internet hates a vacuum, and where there is no information, the internet will invent information. How
Yep.
do you work within that space and deal with those things without kind of coming across, which happens as just instantly becoming hyper defensive about everything because you're trying to put down rumors, or do you just walk away and let it sit, which probably is an even worse idea?
Well, again, so sort of pinning, the fact that you want to have something to say, and you don't want to go into those lulls, but there is the psychology of someone like really biting at the bit to learn more about their favorite franchise if they're really stoked about it. But you still have to maintain expectations through that, right? So, like in the case of AC Mirage, yeah, we announced this thing, and it's a wonderful entry into the AC franchise. We're going back to Baghdad, and there's certain elements of that stealth mechanics that people really want to see again. But the question has been gameplay. Let's see the proof in gameplay. And when are you going to talk about it again? So, To your point, is that a detractor right now? Is there a negativity around people waiting? There will always be some negativity around, like, hey, I want more information. That's a positive. That's a false negative in my eyes. It's someone being so hyped up about it that now they're building up their own expectations. It's how long are you going to let that expectation build before giving it to someone that they have a different perception, right? So as we come here into forward, I think it's reasonable to expect that we're going to be dropping some little nuggets of information, and that's just going to fuel the conversation, and it's going to stimulate the community across their channels, and that's what we want. So sometimes you want that build up, sure, but sometimes internally we're sort of figuring out some of our own production hurdles or brand positioning that we're not ready to start stoking up that conversation flame again. But it is important to obviously close the loop there when you've got players that want information and want to go and advocate for you because they love that brand so much or love that experience. It's their lifestyle.
Absolutely. And you said a thing that I think is great and leads us into a different conversation here. The false negative. I think that whole charting and tracking of player feedback and parsing it out and understanding what the actual sentiment and conversation is, because there's the old saying that, words can have different meanings depending on how they're used. And a lot of these conversations are text. So one of the great challenges of community has always been, well, isn't there a tool we can use? And no, because it is that nuance. It is that, you know, uh, forgive me a little bit of profanity here. Someone says the game is shit or the game is the shit. That's dramatically different sentiments. And being able to parse that and put that back into the dev team, put it back into the marketing team and say, hey, no, this is a good thing that they have this level of excitement and emotional attachment this early. Now let's figure out how to manage that and move it forward. What are some of the best things internally that you've developed for your teams to kind of go out and sort of make that case internally? Because I think we would both agree that one of the hardest things for community to do quite often is the whole justify why we're here,
Right.
and what value do you bring to the internal teams. What do you find are the best ways to kind of bring that in and expose the internal teams to this feedback and explain why it's not a negative that this is going on?
Yeah. You brought up a good point. Data is always open to interpretation, especially if you have a certain narrative that you're going into a meeting with, and you're looking to get some support or some direction on. But I think that's where the value of community will always thrive, is we bring that context. So let's say someone in dev. Obviously, like there's devs out there who have a great relationship with the community, but their primary job is making the game, whether they're on the art side or they're programming or they're a producer. We're in these communities all day long. Okay, we're the ones generating the reports. We understand the context. We understand what happened last week or what happened the year before or what's happening competitively with the other games in that genre. So we could put that data into the right context to make a better actionable decision based off of what's surfacing. So the tools that we use within community to sort of get when the analogy I like to put community when it comes to like conversation trend and sentiment is a pool. You can put your toe in the water and it'll kind of give you the temperature of what's happening, but that's just isolated to wherever your toe's at. What if the heater is over there on the other side of the pool? Okay, how deep does this pool go? You don't know unless you dive in, right? And how salty is the water? That's what community does. We gauge the depth. We gauge how shallow or how far out it goes, the temperature. We do that through conversation tools, whether it's like you got a stream hatchet, which like obviously is data behind streams and retention on views, or you've got things like Sprout. But we also have internal custom tools that tells us how big the conversation is. Is it positive or negative? And there are those false negatives in there. And then we interpret all that and put it within context and give that human element. And then we go to our development teams. We go to our publishing teams and say, hey, this is what the community is saying. Here's the data behind it. This isn't just a gut check. This isn't my biased opinion because maybe I'm a huge AC fan, but this is what's happening. And we have those conversations. We say, what's actionable here, and can we start prioritizing the fixes or the feature requests that are coming in from community? And it's our job to contextualize that, to ensure that that data is understood, but also to report back to players. So there's that relationship again. We we take the actionable feedback and put it into player languages, whether it's through a patch note or a dev blog, and saying, hey, this is what we're doing based off your feedback, and then actually making those changes. And the worst thing that you can do is not making those changes, or saying, hey, we're going to make those, and never actually doing it. And sometimes that happens in development. But it's the faith and confidence that you're also building. I mean, these are people at the end of the day. These are friends you're making at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely, 100%. I love that you likened it to a pool, because I think there's this perception sometimes, and I've heard it, and maybe, a few years ago it was more common than it is now, but you sometimes get the feedback internally of, oh, that's just what the forums say, because once upon a time, that's really the only tool we had to measure, right? That was the whole pool. But now it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Reddit, it's forums, if you have them, it's CS feedback, enters this whole conversation loop at some point. It's not just one location. So the whole process has changed. You're not waiting for someone to come to you. We're actively, in community, going out to channels. Reddit's a really good example. It's a great tool, in my opinion, but you also have to have that, understanding of, this is just the toe, right?
Right.
There's an ocean out there, to carry on the water analogy, of other sentiments from other places. And now you see things, like you mentioned, streams, those are their own communities. Each of these streamers has their own community, and there's a sentiment within that community. Collating all of this and bringing it together is no simple task. What do you recommend in terms of, pulling that together and putting it into some sort of comprehensible report, for those who don't get it, right? Who aren't in these every day, and
Yeah.
present that?
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. Is how deep is this pool? It's massive. We're talking more like oceanic size at this point, and there's no way that you can scrape every single piece of conversation and show a true representation of what the community is saying. So you take little slivers, right, and you take a percentage of that conversation and say, okay, let's say out of the hundreds of thousands of conversations around AC Mirage gameplay, we're going to scrub 10,000 of those, and using our tools. So like tools like Crimson Hexagon, which are internally built or custom tools that are listening to channels that we designate, and then scraping certain keywords based off of what we're looking to find. And then we kind of expand those parameters too, to ensure that we have a good bell curve of sources that we're capturing. And then we analyze that percentage, and that is pretty damn accurate. You could say that 25% of the conversation we scraped out of the hundreds of thousands of comments are going to be representative of what the wider body thinks, and it's pretty damn accurate. And that's the most efficient way of doing things. Now, granted, there are those false negatives. Are you pointing to the right channels? Are you listening at the right time? And are you interpreting the data properly? We'll see where AI goes. I don't know if that's necessarily going to phase us out as the human, contextual need on this, and discerning what's a false negative or a true positive. But that's typically how we do that. We take a sliver of the pool and say that that's representative of a larger body, and then we make actions based off of that.
I think within all of that, there's also an important message for the community. We understand and appreciate we can't literally read every piece of commentary that is left, but we do have a means to get a very strong sense. And there's a trust level there, I think, where part of what you said the community's job is to actually report back to the community as well. It's not just letting internal know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong and how to fix it. It's also coming back to the community and saying, hey, this is what we're hearing, we do hear you, and putting it in front of them. But I think there's also this it's a really small, loud segment of the community who then tends to stand up and go, but that's not what I want.
Yeah.
How do you address it? It's always a small group. There are ways to address it and there are ways not to address it. Give me the best case scenario of very vocal, let's just say community members, not even a group, just real vocal and strongly opinionated individuals who can pull groups with them. What's the best way of addressing that within the context of gaming, at least?
You're bringing up the complexities of communities, right? And yeah, certain voices have larger weight, so my time on Battlefield was just riddled with things like this. You had a very vocal group of Battlefield players who, let's take, for example, YouTubers who have massive influence, who are creating content and can absolutely impact your DAU, can impact the way things are perceived. And MTX, we've seen it time after time. So these voices, although are one of a handful of big YouTubers, if they don't like a certain feature, we need to take that into consideration. Like there's a certain sort of factor here, a modifier that maybe prior to their involvement wasn't a big issue for us, or maybe the community wasn't talking about it too much. But now you've got someone like, no, not picking on anybody, but like say Doom 49, he's a good friend of mine. He's talking about, say, helicopters are messed up. But he has a personal love for the helicopters. But he's got this influence that the community might start thinking, oh, you know what? Actually, those helicopters are messed up. So, like, we need to balance the fact that, okay, there is this influence. Is it truly messed up? Is it going to challenge the balance of the game, the philosophy behind Battlefield, which is the rock, paper, scissors? But is it representative of what the mass audience wants? And that's where more data comes in. So you gotta kind of go through a process. Okay, here's what the communities are saying. This is what the core or the Doom 49s are saying. This is what the mass audience is saying. Now let's prioritize these with development. And let's bring in more data. Let's bring in the temperature of the pool. Let's talk about, if we do make that change, is it going to piss anybody off, or is it going to make a better experience? How much of a resource need is it to do it? That's a big, we have finite resources in development. Do we want to put it towards helicopter balance? Or are we going to put that towards the next map that's coming up? So we need to weigh all those, right? And then, bringing it back to Doom 49. Hey, this is what we've decided. It may or may not be in your interest, but we'll revisit in the future if you're still not happy with it. And it's always having things open and fluid, I think, is really important, but also being on top of transparency and ensuring that people have that information and closing the loop on conversations.
I think you touched on a really important point. There is finite money, finite time in every studio, every project, and resource management is huge. And oftentimes, we've both been there where we do have to explain to communities that, hey, based on resources available, this is where we need to put our focus, which makes some people very happy and can make other people even saltier than they were before. How do you kind of make sure that we're making the right decisions while also not consistently making the decisions that are just ticking off one corner of the community endlessly? How do you make sure to get that balance in there so that, sometimes maybe we do have to divert resources, maybe where we don't necessarily always want to put them, but we do need to address this part of the community because they're our friends too, right?
Yeah. I think what you're starting to get at as well is that we don't, in community, don't actually own the product. We have very little direct influence over what resource development puts towards things. So it's always important to remember that we're facilitators of feedback. We're facilitators of communications. And what we do is we provide a service to our production partners, to our brand and say marketing partners as well, to allow them to have better informed or better insights to make more informed decisions. So at the end of the day, yes, we're putting our confidence in our data to represent us as professionals and our professional opinion, or not even opinion, our professional recommendation based off of that data. But at the end of the day, it's development that needs to make that decision, prioritize things. Now, if they start going towards the route of not doing something that's going to facilitate a good relationship with our community, yeah, we're going to come in, we're going to double down like, hey, we know you said you didn't want to prioritize that, but have you considered this set of data? So I always lean into the science behind things. I never go gut check, especially when I'm up at a round table of development leaders who are deploying and allocating resources to hit deadlines on a game. Why am I going to divert them from meeting those deadlines potentially? If it's an important factor in the community, obviously I'm going to really dig into that data, bring that over. But then at the end of the day, communities, our players also need to realize that community professionals have very little direct influence over the decisions that are made in development, and that's why it's important for communities to speak their voice and to engage with us on social. So that way we can get that data and go make a decision about it.
I think you've made a really strong point there, in that one of the things, in the passion of wanting to have their voices heard, communities will occasionally forget that at the end of the day, A, these are people that are building these games, and B, it's also a business. There are, whether we like it or not, and I think we've all been on the player side where it's like, man, why don't they just do this, right? But the realities are, because the data, as you point out, maybe says that from a practical financial responsibility standpoint, those resources are best spent here.
Mm-hmm.
How hard is that to voice to a community without making it sound like we're just chasing dollars here?
Yeah. And we've seen that before. We've seen like some messaging land and just flop horribly. And it's like, oh, you greedy bastards, like you're just doing this to monetize the shit out of people. And then those communities move on, and it has been the downfall of some games. But at the end of the day, you got to have a human voice. And that's why I really like leaning into developers on channels, and kind of opening up some transparency, especially in like this free to play live environment. I've worked on Apex. We've got X Defiant coming up. These are great examples of having an internal infrastructure that knows what's possible, but also communicating out to players what's possible. And sometimes you may not want to deliver news that, hey, you know what? We don't have the resources for that. We've got to put that off. But it's setting expectation with our core communities. With Battlefield, I was very successful at doing that. And you and I worked on a lot of Battlefield campaigns together. And I want to say for a little while there, it was tough to maintain the expectations because not many people knew how Battlefield was developed and the limitations of, say, just game development in general. And it wasn't until we started to bring in what we call the Game Changers, which is a great influencer program. We brought these players in the halls of DICE, and they started to learn about the limitations and where we can expand Battlefield. And they took the channels and they made videos about those things. They started educating our players for us, on behalf of us. Now, I know not many teams have that luxury, but the moment that you can start saying, hey, here's our limitations and let's work within that, I think our communities start to understand and are a bit more forgiving when a certain feature doesn't come online or we're not able to address, say, a big critical bug. But it's having that transparency and really buying the trust and faith in your communities. But it starts with being human. It starts with talking about, some of the red tape as well, to a certain extent,
Absolutely. No, those the Battlefield days were interesting days. Some of them were quite long, but again, it was all about humanizing the teams and kind of tamping down the sentiment and getting it turned around to help people understand that, again, we in community aren't the decision makers. We influence the decisions. We give data to help support certain decisions, but at the end of the day, there are others making the final decisions. And I think one of the things where we can make decisions kind of independent of teams is where we're looking and where we're listening. And one of the big challenges right now for community teams is, especially with some of the things that have gone on with a few social channels of late, where people seem to be wanting to flee them and find other alternatives. Now we have just these endless lists. I hear of a new one every day. There's some new social channel and it feels like all your friends are going to it. How do you figure out, how do you parse out where to go next to listen. What is that process, right? Because I can think of like 5 Twitter replacements right now, and it's none of them have done it actually, but there are conversations there.
Yeah, last year, with the whole Twitter debacle and Elon Musk coming in and taking over, you had a lot of alternatives that sprung up, like you said, Mastodon, Hive, and those were all on our radar. And we were like, okay, if these really start to take off, we want to be on the forefront. Hell, there was a couple other like live chat group. What was one that came up? I forgot. I'm drawing a blank. Do you remember? It was just like a kind of like a group live podcasting platform.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of it, but it was functionally like Twitter Spaces, right? Where you just kind of
Yes.
flop into this space and you can talk.
So my case in point, a lot of hype. I don't remember the platform. No one
Yep.
else does either, So like, first of all, it's really tough to break into the social network sphere when you're up against these 800-pound gorillas that have
Yep.
dominated the market already. So as a publishing core team, we're always looking at these channels, what's emerging, and are they building a big user base? And is that where people are migrating? And I don't want to be the last one to migrate with them.
Right.
So at what point do you start dedicating resources to build that channel is the ultimate question that you're asking. Well, if the players are there and it's a sizable communities where we see great benefits and tools over there, we're going to start migrating over there or piloting on that. I think a great example here of one that's obviously been in the industry for quite some time, but really making some big strides is Discord. Like Discord is really starting to pour into its functionality and learn and bringing in new tools to integrate directly with developers and with games to make a more 360 holistic experience rather than just a place to converse and a place to look for a group, LFG on some sort of match. And that's what I'm really interested with Discord. Now, Discord, we've all adopted, but what we haven't adopted is development resources to start integrating with some of these, whether it's single sign-on or whether it's in-game challenges and different quests or account linking or game linking, whatever it may be. Those are sort of the things that we look at. Like, what are the feature sets of these social networks? What value does it provide in terms of communications and in terms of our communities, and are people migrating? So to end my point on this, we saw a lot of people who brought up an antiquated platform, forums. We saw a lot of people
Right.
migrate off of that. And you've seen a lot of publishers like Activision or Fortnite shutting down some of their forums and saying, we're full Discord now. That's where players went. And we did the same thing. We just recently decommissioned all of our discussion forums and went where the players are, Discord. Now we're up against a challenge. Does Discord have the same data sets as what forums did? So we can start pulling that information to make better services, better games, better brand positioning, etc.
I do find it interesting you mentioned Discord, that recently some of the roadmaps I've seen for Discord is bending Discord slightly more towards that forum kind of layout, and sub forums and all of the things people said they hated about forums. Discord is realizing, and I think people who have now left forums and gone to Discord realize, that actually does help the conversation a little bit. And to your point, certainly makes it a lot easier to find those data points and go through. I've kind of skirted this last topic, and I left it for last because it's a big topic, but it's more of a loud topic than a big topic, and that's really toxicity. At some point, I feel every community, they have to deal with it, whether it's within very large, well-known spaces, or thankfully sometimes the toxic players go run off into their own little corner of the internet and just they go be mad over there. But it's still information and feedback that we need. How do we address just like overtly toxic individuals or groups? I mean, there are, if you go into MMOs, there are entire guilds that are fairly toxic within their spaces. What is the best way to approach toxicity before it gets to the point where it's a real problem?
Yeah, toxicity is a nuanced challenge. You have toxicity that comes from a multitude of different things. Whether it's disgruntled groups around the game and the quality, or it's truly, say, like hate groups that subscribe to your game and start spewing bullcrap all over your channels. We set up internally to mitigate and avoid these things. So first of all, I'm going to get a little legalese on you, and we always lean into the legal side of things at the end of the day to justify disciplining those who are toxic by ensuring we have good code of conduct. Here's what you can and can't say. Here's black and white. Now, obviously, people find the gray areas and skirt around that, and I think that's where a lot of toxicity is bred. But at the end of the day, what are they being toxic about? And is there something that we can do about it? So on the optimistic side of things, we recently had a lot of toxic challenges on Rainbow Six Siege. So going into year 8, you saw a lot of, we saw, MAU declining and people stepping away from the game because of anti-cheat efforts, because of server issues. And that was generating a lot of toxicity. So ours was very much something that we could control by allocating more talent and resources to addressing some of these things. And we have. So in year 8, we brought on a whole host of mouse and keyboard mitigation tools, better anti-cheat, and that has reduced toxicity significantly. And that's where ours was stemming from. But then you have other cases where toxicity may be because, again, like you just have a spur of hate groups that came in, or maybe you've got like some crazy success and you just have people being, excuse my French, asshats on your channels for the sake of it. You need proper moderation in place, and not every team can scale to the amount of moderation needed. So you want to empower your communities to police itself, and setting up, if you have the opportunity, volunteers that come in. That's a part of your communities too, and people like to do that. I personally am part of communities that I volunteer my moderation for.
Same.
And so it's empowering your community to live and breathe and thrive on its own as well. So when you have a good, strong community with all the things that we talked about, we're following through with our commitments, where we open up this communication with them, they're going to want to fight for you as well. And your job is a hell of a lot easier when you've got a great group of people that believe in your product, that believe in you, even through the difficult times, but are willing to say, hey, you're out of line, blue guy 432, get out of here with your hate speech. I'm going to go flag this or whatever, get a band hammer out and whatever, and lean back into your code of conduct. So it's important to catch early on toxicity, because it can absolutely, the old cliche, poison the well. And we've seen it happen a long time.
Absolutely. No. And I like that you made the differentiate. You differentiated between those who are there to be toxic, because it's just a toxic group there to stir the pot, right? And those who have become toxic either due to some change or some other alteration in the character or format of the game, that with the correct insights and the correct data brought back to the team, you can fix very quickly and very easily and resolve that issue. I think it's really important that all communities understand that there are both types of toxicity, and sometimes, we don't like to talk about it, but the ban hammer does have to come out, and it evokes the inevitable free speech debates, which is its own podcast. But this has been super informative, Dan. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and hang out with us and talk about, one of my favorite topics, communities and the care and feeding thereof. Really appreciate you taking your time. Can't thank you enough.
I really appreciate the time, man. So let's close out on a System of a Down as we.
Uh-oh. You can grab that guitar and play for us. What's going to happen?
Right?
What are we doing here?
No, it's funny. I was had a buddy over. He was trying to learn how to play Toxicity on drums, and I was like, oh wow, okay, that's full circle here. Great. Yep. But Rick, thank you very much. I could talk about communities all day, so whenever you're ready to talk more and get more into the depths, maybe we kind of talk about our experiences of communities and some of the glitz and glamour, as well as some of the dark sides of it.
So some of the dark side. One of my favorite panels ever at PAX was the dark side of community, where we told scary stories in the dark and had a whole lot of fun. So we will definitely pencil you in for one of those conversations. Maybe we round up a couple other long timers and we can really put on a good scary story show for them all.
Oh, we've got them for days.
Absolutely. It should be another PAX panel that does that. We'd fill the house. Again, Dan, thank you so much. To all of you, thank you for listening. We do this every month. You can find us on YouTube, which is where the video version lives. And you can now also find us on Spotify. Just look for Yellow Pike Media on the hook. Have a great one. Appreciate your time. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.